A Trump-appointed prosecutor just indicted New York's Attorney General over a $600-a-year mortgage dispute. Career prosecutors said there was no case. So why is this happening now, and what does it mean for the rule of law? Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, was indicted Thursday on bank fraud charges. The alleged crime? Renting out a second home when her mortgage paperwork said she wouldn't. The amount prosecutors say she fraudulently gained? About $633 a year. And the prosecutor who brought the charges. A Trump appointee who overruled career attorneys who saw no probable cause. This is where we are. Let me walk you through what actually happened, what legal experts are saying, and why this case might tell us more about political retaliation than mortgage fraud. First, the facts. According to The Guardian, reporting on October 10th, James bought a second home in Norfolk, Virginia, back in 2020. She signed mortgage documents that included what's called a rider, a clause saying the property was her second home and restricting certain rental arrangements. Then, prosecutors allege, she rented the property out anyway. By doing so, the indictment claims, James secured a better mortgage rate and a seller credit. Over the life of the loan, that saved her about $18,933 total. Sounds straightforward, right? Not quite. Here's where it gets complicated. Career prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia looked at these allegations. They reviewed the evidence, and they concluded there was no probable cause to charge the case. No probable cause means they didn't think there was enough evidence that a crime had been committed. But Lindsay Halligan, Trump's hand-picked interim U.S. attorney, went ahead anyway. She presented the case to a grand jury, and according to the reporting, her decision caught top Justice Department officials off guard. Why does that matter? Because federal prosecutors turn down cases all the time. They have limited resources. They prioritize cases with significant harm, clear evidence of intent, and a strong likelihood of conviction. This case had none of those things. Let's start with the money. Even the most junior prosecutor in a U.S. attorney's office would turn down a case with a loss amount this low, according to Jacqueline Kelly, a former federal prosecutor in New York. She's now a partner at Boies Schiller Flexner, and she told The Guardian it would never be signed off on by a supervisor. Why not? Because typically, mortgage fraud cases pursued by the Federal Housing Finance Agency involve substantial losses to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, the government-sponsored enterprises that back mortgages. We're talking hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. James's alleged fraud, $633 a year if it was a standard 30-year mortgage. One former federal prosecutor, speaking anonymously to avoid professional repercussions, called it Bupkis. That's Yiddish for nothing. They asked, "Are you really going to believe when you get up there that the Attorney General of New York would commit this willfulness over $600 a year?" That's the credibility problem prosecutors face. But let's say you think the dollar amount doesn't matter. Maybe you think fraud is fraud, no matter the scale. Fair enough. Let's look at the legal elements. Barbara McQuaid, a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, explained what prosecutors have to prove. They need to show that at the exact moment James signed the mortgage paperwork, she was aware of the provision, intended to use the property differently, and intended to gain a financial benefit through deceit. That's a high bar. Why? Because you can't read someone's mind. McQuaid pointed out that anyone who's been through a mortgage closing knows what it's like. You're handed a daunting pile of papers. You sign dozens of pages. It's overwhelming. Proving that James had criminal intent at that specific moment, when she was in the middle of a pandemic, buying a second home, signing stacks of documents, is extremely difficult. And there's more. Adam Levitin, a law professor at Georgetown University, dug into the actual language of the rider James signed. He wrote a blog post on credit slips breaking it down. Here's what he found. The rider doesn't prohibit renting the home outright. Instead, it prevents the owner from giving control over rental decisions to someone else. It's about maintaining decision-making authority, not about whether you can rent at all. Also, the restriction only kicks in 1 year after the agreement. The indictment made public Thursday doesn't say when James rented the home or for how long. That's a pretty big gap in the prosecution story. And the rider includes an exemption for extenuating circumstances. James obtained this mortgage in August 2020, right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. If that's not an extenuating circumstance, what is? Levitin concluded, James doesn't appear to have made any misrepresentation in her mortgage because the mortgage does not directly prohibit rentals. He also noted he's unaware of the federal government ever charging anyone for fraud based on renting out a second home. This is unprecedented. So why is this happening? Let's talk about the context. Last month, Donald Trump publicly admonished then-Attorney General Pam Bondi to indict Letitia James. He also called for indictments of former FBI Director James Comey and California Senator Adam Schiff. Trump said it out loud. And now James has been indicted. Coincidence? James released a statement Thursday evening. She called the charges baseless and said Trump's own public statements make clear his only goal is political retribution. She added that his actions are a grave violation of the constitutional order and have drawn sharp criticism from members of both parties. Here's why that matters legally. Trump's public statements, combined with career prosecutors concluding there was no probable cause, give James strong grounds for a selective prosecution defense. That's when you argue you're being charged not because you committed a crime, but because of who you are or what you represent. John Coffey, a professor at Columbia Law School, told The Guardian that normally a vindictive prosecution claim doesn't work, but he added, you don't usually have the president calling for these sort of things. That's the understatement of the year. You also don't usually have a political appointee overruling career prosecutors to pursue a case this week. And you don't usually have the head of a federal agency weaponizing mortgage filings to target the president's political enemies. But that's exactly what's happening. William Poult, the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency and a staunch Trump ally, sent a criminal referral to the Justice Department in April regarding 2 different real estate transactions involving James. Neither of those transactions were the ones charged this week. Poult has also accused Adam Schiff of mortgage fraud. He's made similar allegations against Lisa Cook, a Federal Reserve governor Trump is trying to remove. In Cook's case, Poult alleged she rented out a property she indicated was her second home, the same kind of claim now being made against James. See the pattern? This isn't about mortgage fraud. It's about using the machinery of government to punish critics and political opponents. Now, let's be clear about what we're not saying. We're not saying people in power should be above the law. If Letitia James committed fraud, she should be held accountable. That principle matters. But accountability requires fairness. It requires evidence. It requires treating similar cases similarly. And none of that is happening here. Career prosecutors saw no case. Legal experts say the indictment is weak. The alleged financial benefit is trivial. The legal theory is untested. And the timing, right after Trump publicly demanded her indictment, couldn't be more suspicious. This is what selective prosecution looks like. It's what happens when political loyalty matters more than legal merit. So what happens next? James will almost certainly file a motion to dismiss based on selective prosecution. Her lawyers will point to Trump's statements, the career prosecutor's conclusion, and the unusual circumstances of this case. Will it work? That's up to a judge. But even if the case isn't dismissed, conviction will be an uphill battle. Prosecutors have to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to convince a jury that the Attorney General of New York risked her career, her reputation, and her freedom over $600 a year. That's a tough sell. One former prosecutor told The Guardian this is one of the two weakest cases they've ever seen, along with the case against James Comey. Think about that. The Trump administration is bringing what legal experts call the weakest cases they've ever seen against the president's most prominent critics. That should worry everyone who cares about the rule of law. Because if the Justice Department can be weaponized against an attorney general, it can be weaponized against anyone. Here's what you can do. Pay attention to how this case unfolds. Watch whether the judge allows the selective prosecution defense. Notice whether any other public figures, especially Trump allies, are charged for similar mortgage issues. Spoiler, they won't be. Ask your representatives whether they're okay with political prosecutions. Because this isn't a partisan issue. Today, it's Letitia James. Tomorrow, it could be anyone who challenges power. And remember what's at stake. A functioning democracy depends on institutions that serve justice, not political revenge. When prosecutors ignore career attorneys, pursue trivial cases, and follow presidential demands, we lose that. We're told this is about holding people accountable. But accountability without fairness is just punishment. And punishment without evidence is persecution. Letitia James has spent years holding powerful people and corporations accountable under the law. She led the investigation that resulted in a massive civil fraud judgment against Trump. She's pursued cases against big banks, opioid manufacturers, and polluters. That's her job. Now she's being indicted over an alleged $600 a year fraud that career prosecutors said wasn't even a case. You don't have to love Letitia James to see what's happening here. This is bigger than one attorney general. It's about whether we have equal justice or political justice, whether evidence matters or only power matters. The answer to that question will define what kind of country we are. So keep watching, keep asking questions, and don't let Bupkis cases distract us from the real stakes. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really going on, consider subscribing for more clear, fact-first analysis of the stories that matter.
If you enjoyed the video, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos.